Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Kvetching with Adam and Jared. We hope you enjoyed our previous episode, which was about the investigation into Rutgers, or the episode before our previous one, and all the terrible anti-Semitic things that are happening on that campus. Tonight, we're doing a little bit something different. We're looking at someone who is generally considered to be on the political right, which is Adam's home turf. So I'm going to let him do much of the talking tonight.
We're going to talk about Candace Owens, who has been in the news quite a lot over the last couple of months because of a rift that she has had over at the Daily Wire with Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring.
His name's Boring, I-N-G.
Yeah, isn't it pronounced Boring?
B-O-R-I-N-G.
Boreing.
Oh, that makes it so much more exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for the record, I'll set the record straight. I've always thought Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro's were two stupid morons, and therefore I haven't paid much attention to them over the past
Well,
4 or 5 years.
Differently about it. I have a lot of respect for both of them, or used to have respect for both of them.
And you're not embarrassed to say it, really. Okay.
I'm not at all embarrassed to say it. No, no. I have my problems with Ben Shapiro.
He's a jackass.
Well, I mean, he's not very good at kind of interpersonal kinds of connections with people. Honestly.
Well, I imagine after he read the lyrics for read the lyrics for Wet Ass Pussy online, I imagine he went home to a decent evening with his wife.
I don't know what to tell you, but I honestly I don't know if I would really consider him to be my top choice to invite over for Shabbos dinner. But to sit down and have a conversation with about politics in another setting, I suppose I would like to. I consider him to be incredibly smart. He's sharp. There's no question. He's sharp and he knows his stuff, and he's right like 95% of the time. So I have respect for him. Candace Owens is a different matter altogether.
To be clear, I'm not endorsing, Ben Shapiro's forays into the world of wet ass pussy. I'm just offering commentary on his decision to read those lyrics.
I don't think you needed to clarify that.
Okay, all right.
I think that the audience understood what you meant by that. Okay. Candace Owens, though, I used to have respect for when she became a rising star on the right. Her insights and her analysis during the BLM riots and the George Floyd fiasco, and in particular on the racial issues, I thought was spot on. And as a Black woman millennial, I thought that her words of wisdom on those issues were very important at that time. And I would say that they're still going to remain to be important as she continues to weigh in on those subjects. The problem I have, though, is when she has delved into other subjects. I haven't agreed with her all that much on foreign policy. I have a difference of opinion on a lot of foreign policy matters with other conservatives, actually. Maybe it's because I'm a neoconservative, and the conservative movement is moving away from that. That might be a big reason.
Which is funny because my inclination and support for a Republican position was really in the early Bush years. I mean, before Iraq, really. But because I saw some merit in U.S. intervention abroad, but I don't think it works ultimately at the end of the day.
It's not just that. I'll probably offend much of my conservative audience if we have a conservative audience for this show. But when I say this, that I kind of parted ways with much of the conservative movement in rejecting Brexit. I did not believe that Brexit was a good thing for Britain, and I don't think that I think that we're seeing now the harmful consequences of it. So I'm not in any way a globalist or a what do they call it in Europe, a continentalist, right? I don't like the idea that integration in Europe is interfering with national sovereignty in a lot of these countries. But I don't think that these kinds of problems have to be solved by countries like Great Britain just withdrawing from the EU. I think there's other solutions, and Great Britain in a fairly unique position and being in the top three most powerful countries in the EU, it was in a more unique position to actually solve some of these problems had they stayed in. So I've never been a big supporter of Brexit. I sympathize with a lot of the concerns that Brexiteers have had, the Leavers have had, but no, I'm not a big fan of that movement. And
For some historical perspectives, I see it as parallel to Henry VIII, not getting his divorce from the Pope and then getting divorced and creating the Anglican Church. So
really, you see
break
it.
it. Well, I'm not. I'm stating that semi-seriously. But
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you to expand on that and connect the dots for me, but if you just meant it tongue in cheek, then
yeah, no, there's no doubt.
okay.
Okay.
All right.
But
Yeah.
you know the English, so
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
I
So
have no opinion on Brexit. I absolutely don't.
yeah. But anyway, so yeah. So when she weighed in on a lot of those issues, I wasn't in total agreement with her, and you know. A lot of these things involving foreign policy, I disagreed with her on. But then she got into the war in Israel, the Israel-Gaza war, and she's been absolutely horrible on that. And I think that she has revealed herself to actually be an anti-Semite. It all started actually when she became an apologist for Kanye West. Remember when he had that he made that they issued that tweet that the Jews are in for what DEFCON 3, right? Do you remember that?
Mhm.
And the whole world was really everyone was shunning him, and Candace Owens came to his defense. Right, they were working together, I guess, prior to that on the Blexit movement, which is blacks leaving, exiting from the Democratic Party and joining the political right. And at the time that she was defending him, I really thought that she just was. Um, in a position of between a rock and a hard place where she really wanted very badly for this other Blexit supporter who was a celebrity to be taken a lot more seriously and not be shunned for one comment that just didn't come out right from her view. But
So,
now,
so do you think? Wait, let me ask you something. Do you
yeah,
think that race is a factor in her siding with Kanye?
I think it's only a factor in her siding with Kanye, or it did at the time, because she likes to align herself, and understandably so, with other Black conservatives.
All four of them, yeah.
I like to align myself with other Jewish conservatives,
All
right?
four of them, yeah. Okay.
All four of them, exactly. Yeah. Well, there's five Jewish conservatives and with four Black conservatives. No,
Okay.
actually, there's a fairly larger number of Black
You almost
conservatives.
have a minion.
What?
You almost have a minion.
For the Jewish conservatives. Yeah, we
Yeah.
have enough for a minion.
Well, you
Uh,
could bring the blacks into the minion. We have a non-racial policy when it comes to that.
right. So I thought that was an issue at the time that was kind of giving her tunnel vision, on the Kanye West story. She had gotten into some trouble prior to that with her comment, seemingly defending Hitler, which I don't think that is what she was doing. Um,
What were
that
her exact words
for what?
for that? I have one sentence for that one with the Hitler. If Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. Was that the extent of it, what she said, or were there more words to that?
Well, I mean, it was a little bit more than that, but that was the gist of it. And I think what she was saying at that time was that she was responding to a lot of the people that were calling Trump Hitler because Trump is nationalistic and Hitler was nationalistic. And her point was that if Hitler's agenda was just simply Germany first, and that was the end of it, then that would have been okay because national leaders should be, vociferously defending their country's national interests and putting their own countries ahead and their own country's interest ahead of the rest of the world's interest.
I
But
can't find the quote now, but I remember specifically the full quote from her did have something to do with expansionism, right? Implying that what Hitler did within his own borders was okay because it was just nationalism. So it
I
isn't.
don't remember exactly what it was that she was talking. There was something in there about expansionism, yeah, but how do you expand within your own borders, though? I
No,
don't think I don't think she
she
was defending.
rejected his expansionism, but supported what as legitimate nationalism what he was doing with in his own borders. So up till whether you consider the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria as expansionism, could be debated or not. Since they wanted to unify with Germany, and according to the Treaty of Versailles, they should have unified with Germany, according to the principles laid out by Woodrow Wilson, I should say.
But these kinds of things, I could disagree with her on and still not call her a racist or an anti-Semite or
She is an
something.
anti-Semite if she
I
agrees with
know
what
that
Hitler did.
now. Okay, I understand that, but I don't think that that at the time was the issue.
If everything Hitler did up until 1938 was a legitimate form of nationalism, according to her, then there's a problem.
That's not what she's saying.
It's a
No,
simple
that wasn't the
thing.
point of, that was not the point of the tweet. We don't need to get into the look. Ultimately, you and I agree that she's an anti-Semite, right?
Yeah, I'm
So
just
don't,
pushing
we don't
the
really
clock
need to
back and
get
saying,
into
yeah,
this, right? I don't think that her comments at the time were necessarily anti-Semitic. Maybe she had anti-Semitism in her heart. I don't know,
mhm.
right? But I don't. I think that what she said at the time could be read in a different way. But over time, though, especially since the her number one, her defense of Kanye West, and then now in recent years with her rift with Ben Shapiro and some of the things that she's been saying on Twitter, and then platforming Norman Finkelstein, giving him a softball interview on her show on the Daily Wire was completely beyond the pale. Some of the
Why did she even want to interview him? I mean, I mean, it's normal Finkelstein's. I'm from Canada. We say Steen there, not Stein. But he's so far on the left. Why would she want him on her show?
Well, that's the big question. That is the $64 million question. That the why is she giving this lunatic radical idiot on the left this softball interview, or even having him at all on her show? Well, look, historically, she has had left-wing people on her show. She had Mark Lamont Hill on her show, and I thought that the debate she had with Mark Lamont Hill was fantastic. I thought she destroyed Mark Lamont Hill.
No,
There
yeah,
was
I see that as a legitimate guest, absolutely. And
and
an African
yeah,
American activist who is very far to the left, who is also
yeah,
an influencer and a media personality. But that's not Norm Finkelstein.
I understand that, and especially to bring her onto the Daily Wire, which has a strong Jewish influence, and that Ben Shapiro is their founder, who's an Orthodox Jew, and their number one star. I thought was very strange, and she does so kind of in the midst of herself being very critical of Israel and somewhat accused. I think she flat out accused the Israelis of engaging in genocidal behavior,
Now,
and she
the
I think
political milieu within which she swings does not adhere to that position whatsoever.
what
The people she hangs out with, politically speaking, does not agree with that whatsoever, right? I mean,
is weird because she once worked for PragerU. So
Mhm.
she once worked for Dennis Prager. Now she's working or was working with Ben Shapiro at the Daily Wire. So it's odd. It's very strange.
Mhm.
In fact, when she was testifying before Congress a few years ago, she used the fact that she was working for Dennis Prager as an argument for she can't be an anti-Semite. I'm working for Dennis Prager. So anyway, it's very strange.
So
So
people have called her an anti-Semite in the past, and that wasn't for the Hitler remark, or it was for the Hitler remark.
it's that's when it started.
Okay. She was
But
still
see, the thing is, though, you got to bear in mind one thing. All conservatives who are not Jewish at one time or another get called an anti-Semite. So it's really not that surprising that Candace Owens would have been called that. She just happens to be one of the few instances in which people who call her that were right.
You know, the same thing could be said about people on the left, that they get called anti-Semites at one point or another.
I don't know. I'm not on the left, so I can't testify to.
Yeah, but we call them anti-Semites all the time on the show.
Yeah, but we're calling real anti-Semites anti-Semites. I'm not gonna. You will never hear me call most people on the left anti-Semites. You'll never hear me call, 95% of the Democratic Party anti-Semites. You won't hear me call Biden an anti-Semite. I didn't call Obama an anti-Semite. I argued with people that we're calling him that. I would say that most of them are not referred to as anti-Semites. Maybe sometimes they'll say that they'll be, their policies might be accused of being anti-Semitic, but they themselves aren't going to be called anti-Semites all that often. Anyway, I think it's important though, because the conservatives, by the very definition, um, which is very, looking inwards to Western civilization, or even more specifically American civilization, get thought of as being bigots and racists all the time, and so we're just more prone to it.
And anti-education. That's another important
And
thing.
anti-education, pro-censorship, and
Yeah. Well, no, I hear it all the time when that when conservatives say there's a lack of ideological diversity in universities, and there's a bias
there
and
is.
conspiracy against conservatives. No, I agree with you on that.
There is a conspiracy against conservatives in universities.
Yeah, but the response that I hear from people on the left always is, well, the conservatives are all against education, which is true for a certain percentage of them, absolutely.
Not the ones that want to teach in universities. Like
That's right. No, I
say that I'm
absolutely, yeah,
intellectual. I'm an intellectual,
yeah. No, they do
right?
exist. They absolutely do exist, and I know at least two or three of them. You being one of them.
At least, yeah, all
Yeah,
four of us.
yeah. But our friend who we've interviewed on this podcast, I won't bother to name her, but she,
Ooh,
well, okay, Naya. I remember she said to me,
oh,
years ago. It's approaching 20 years already, where she said there's a conspiracy against conservative people in academia. And I said, "What are you, crazy?" I did not believe her. And then, 15 years later, I realized she was right.
I never heard this story. I'll have to talk to Naya about that. But
Yeah, she
I,
didn't remember saying it when I brought
oh,
it up to her. I issued her a public apology for it.
okay, all right.
Yeah. But I mean, what did I know at the time? I was doing Russian history. I wasn't really, engaged politically in any way whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah,
Well, uh, so where are we going? Do we want to get back to talking about Candace Owens?
absolutely. This is your thing.
Yeah. So what happened was, in the midst of her, criticisms of Israel, and this was just after her platforming Norman Finkelstein, which probably really infuriated Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring. Um, Ben and Candace had a rift on Twitter, or X as it's called now, the platform formerly known as Twitter. And she said to him, and this was the anti-Semitic remark. She said, "You cannot worship both God and money." And then Ben said, "Candace, if you feel that," I'm paraphrasing, something very close to this, if you feel uncomfortable taking money from the Daily Wire, by all means quit." And then she responded and said, "Christ is king," which led to obviously weeks of a religious rift. And Ben and Jeremy are, furious about that, and that ultimately is what I think led to her firing from the Daily Wire. Apparently now, and it may have happened today because they were arranging it. Ben and Candace were to have a debate. Ben insisted that there will be a moderator. And I know that Joe Rogan was thrown out as a possible name for someone to moderate their debate. I don't know whatever
Well, he's a
happened.
racist asshole. I mean, I wouldn't want.
I'm not a fan of Joe Rogan, so I'm not going to defend Joe Rogan. I seriously doubt he's a racist, though. But don't really watch his show, and I've rarely seen it. I know of him though, and have seen some of his. She has good guests. So anyway, I whether or not they've had that debate yet, I don't know, but that should be coming very soon. But then a few days back, she put out another tweet, and you have that tweet.
Yep, we could pull it. I'm just trying to find the whole worship money thing here. What does that have to do with the war in Israel?
Well, she's saying this to whether or not she was saying it to Ben Shapiro is up in the air. Like I don't think she's claiming that she didn't mean Ben Shapiro, but Ben
Well,
Shapiro.
if you make a statement like that to a Jew, yes, it's anti-Semitic. But I don't see the connection with the war in Gaza.
It doesn't have any connection with the war in Gaza other than maybe peripherally, right? Where, you once you start criticizing Israel for something, then suddenly you get into all of the Jewish tropes, the anti-Semitic tropes, right? Then
It does say here in the Times of
oh,
Israel, Owens, for example, has called Israel's action in Gaza Strip a genocide.
right.
Yeah. So, which is, what the woke are saying. Maybe she's friends with Omer Bartov.
Um, well, maybe she could be our Shmagegi of 2024.
Oh, it doesn't have to be a Jewish person?
I think it probably does have to be a Jewish academic,
Yeah.
but
Well, Omer, Professor Bartov, I encourage you to, get acquainted with Candace Owens because you appear to be ideological bedfellows on this count.
yeah, well, but Omar Bartov is hardly the only one saying this.
No, I could name another 20 people in Jewish studies.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but her last quote was beyond the pale. I don't know, and it's about Ukraine. I'm going with the assumption here that she's been opposed to as like
This is another one of these things that I have parted ways with her on the foreign policy front, right? I've known that she's been against Ukraine, and of course that issue has divided the Republican Party. It saddens me that has happened because I am very much on Ukraine's side,
yeah.
and I would like to see the United States commit itself ongoingly to supporting the Ukrainians.
Well, isolationism, right? Part of it's isolationism of
Well, it's back to the America First
yeah.
attitude, which is that what if it doesn't directly benefit the United States, then we shouldn't do it. But it's really it's thinking that is um, very narrow. It's very narrow thinking to think that something like Ukraine doesn't affect the United States. If it affects Western civilization, it affects the United States. The United States has to have a broader kind of lens of interest than
Yeah.
just what happens right here on our own borders. Sure, we need to defend American borders. Our southern border needs to be defended, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have wars to be interested in anyway on other fronts throughout the rest of the world. And in this case, we do. Putin is a very bad man. But anyway,
I think a lot of Republicans admire him. I really think that
maybe,
Donald Trump in
maybe,
particular,
maybe there's a little of that, maybe. But I think it's mostly isolationism, or mostly this kind of America first.
well, these
Now,
idiots should
by the
realize
way,
that
this America first attitude taken to the extreme that they do is even more extreme than Trump's position himself, right?
well,
So I don't know.
Trump goes wherever the wind blows and what's convenient for him. But I don't understand how anyone doesn't get that Russian expansionism westward is bad for the United States. It's bad for.
I don't know. I don't know. But you know what?
I mean, you
It
don't
may,
know. I
it,
can tell you as a Russian historian that you do not want Russia sucking up territory, whether you care about the people in the territory he's sucking up or not. And a case can be made for at least Eastern Ukraine and Southern Ukraine's attachment to Russian history, and that they share certain cultural attributes, including a political culture. But nevertheless, one, it is a violation of international law because they were independent for well over two
well,
decades.
a lot of people on the right, for some reason or another, really believe that it's Ukraine's fault for goading Putin into this, or the West's fault in general for goading Putin into this. And also, they reject the notion that Ukraine is even a Western country.
An
Right?
argument can be made that it's not, at least the Eastern part.
Argument can be made that it's not. Sure, but I think it's very clear that Ukraine is at least on its way to becoming a Western country, and that cannot be said of Russia. So
Yeah.
I have.
It's a very recent shift, and any Jew who left the Russian Empire or the early Soviet period can tell you, generational stories of our collective memory of what the Ukrainian people did to the Jewish people. I mean, I don't think they have a liberal political culture, and if they've developed one, it's really only been in the last 10, 15 years.
Well, anyway, it's really caused conservatives to make very odd comments, to say very odd, very anti-conservative things. I mean, it's one thing to just be generally opposed to this foreign aid, but it's another to actually, disagree that this doesn't have that American interests aren't affected by it. And number two, when they say things like, we should not be sending our tax dollars to Ukraine. We should be using it right here in America to solve problems like poverty and the housing crisis and people not being able to afford health care and things like that. When did it become conservative to spend money domestically on solving the war on poverty and providing socialized health care and all that? When did that become conservative? Right. And so obviously conservatives have always believed that the national government serves one function, and that is to advance the nation as a whole in our interests abroad, right? To advance American security, to advance American economic interess, to advance
Domestically for the rich, of course.
American ideals, whatever it might be. It's
The
not.
Republicans have no interest in taking care of the poor. I would like to think you could agree on that.
Well, if it's at the local level, there would be an interest in that, but conservatives don't believe that that is the function of our national government. Why is there so much poverty in some states? Because of the state governments, right? If you want to elect Republican elected officials in those states, I think that would be great. I think they would do a much better job solving those problems there than the Democrats. Democrats don't solve anything. But the point is that the national government's function is not to solve poverty in California or in Colorado.
Hmm.
It's to advance the interests of the entire country, our foreign policy.
Right.
So when did it become conservative to want to instead use the national government for things that are reserved to the states? Like they've abandoned the principle of federalism and all this. Second of all, they seem to think that the United States is incapable of walking and chewing gum at the same time. Of course, we need to fix our southern border, but we also need to worry about Ukraine, right? Why can't we do both? Why isn't the United States capable of having attention on both? It's
Well,
not
why couldn't Bibi have dealt with his judicial reforms and whatever he was doing in the West Bank and also monitored security vis-a-vis Gaza? Apparently he could.
Yeah, well, look, there's so many explanations that I'm not really able to pinpoint who's at fault, who's to blame. There will be an investigation once this war is over. I don't want to get into a long tangent on that war, but John Bolton said the other day, which I found very interesting.
Are you a fan of John Bolton? I
I
am
like
not.
John. Yeah. He said that this war this Israel-Gaza war is in its early stages. So even though it's 6 months on, it's for Bolton still in the early stages, which I think is quite accurate.
Yeah, it might be. But I mean, I know that they withdrew troops today, right? There's barely any troops left in Gaza at this point. It's only 5,000.
Oh, but I've also heard that there's a lot of airstrikes happening though, and yeah. But anyway, what was I saying? Let's get back.
Get back to Candace. Our purpose tonight is to make fun of
The
Candace
reason we
Owens.
delved into all of this, though, is just right. It's kind of show that there's a lot of things going on, at least within some sectors of the American right, I don't really agree with. And Candace Owens is from that sector. right?
Right.
But I think she's even worse. She's really gone off the deep end. Put that tweet up.
Here we go.
Yeah.
And the tweet is on screen 3 over here. See it?
Yes.
Okay.
President Zelensky sure is behaving like a Bolshevist. How many more Christians will he conscript to death?
Hmm.
When I saw that, my jaw dropped. It dropped to the floor.
Yeah. Well,
This right here is such egregious anti-Semitism. It's unbelievable.
yeah, it's outright anti-Semitism. And for our viewers who don't know, Zelensky is Jewish in as much as, one is a Jew after Sovietization and still living there. He doesn't practice, I don't think, being Jewish as much of his identity, but he did have relatives killed in the Holocaust.
After Netanyahu is the only world leader who is Jewish.
Who is?
After Netanyahu, Zelensky is the only world leader who's Jewish.
Didn't they just elect someone in Brazil or somewhere? I thought they just elected in Latin America somewhere. I think they elected a Jew
You
somewhere.
mean Argentina? That guy's not Jewish.
They elected someone somewhere who's Jewish. There is another Jewish leader somewhere. Anyways, yeah, Zelensky, yes, he's Jewish. A little bit ironic that someone who's Jewish gets elected in Ukraine, which historically speaking, is one of the hotspots of anti-Semitism since the early modern period. And if you're going to call him a Bolshevik, and I don't understand what the hell she means by that, not in the least, and follow it up by stating that the people that he's sending to their deaths are Christians, implying that he's not, well, then you've got anti-Semitism, pure and simple, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even need to unpack. We don't need to unpack what she even means by this.
Yeah,
It's very clear that this is anti-Semitic.
yeah.
Why she's calling him a Bolshevist, I don't know. Like, what is in his behavior is anything like being a Bolshevist? I don't know what she means.
It's shorthand for Jewish, much as New York, much as
And okay, well, yeah, of course. The fact that this doesn't have any other explanation, right? It leads you right away to assume it's anti-Semitism. Then, this thing about
I think what she means by Bolshevist is that they're practicing conscription and forcing people to go into battle. I think that's what she means. That it's an oppressive.
their country is under attack. They're being invaded, right? Like, what? But the USSR is not the only country that has conscripted its citizens into the army.
Of course not.
Right? This is a regular thing. Lots of countries in the world do it even when there's no war taking place.
Yeah, no, it's an utterly absurd tweet. And as far as I know, Russia still has mandatory military service and did, before the war broke out.
So there you go, both sides then. And look, if your country's under attack, you could criticize war all you want, but even those that are the most critical of war will always say that we have to go to war if your own country's existential endurance is threatened.
I can't find any news stories on this. All I find are TikTok, people responding on TikTok and Twitter and
Well,
whatever
that's the
else.
type of mentality she's reduced herself to, right? This is not a real story.
I got someone responds: the Bolsheviks were Jews. Orthodox Christians are being persecuted in Ukraine, Ethiopia, and Armenia. I mean, I'm reading the riffraff on Twitter here, which I should obviously not do. Okay, I'm turning off screen share. I think we've all absorbed the general illiteracy and anti-Semitism that's in this tweet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't even know. It's absurd. I mean, there's no context to this, right? I haven't been, again, I don't follow her, so I don't know what would have prompted her to tweet.
I follow her not every day, but I look, on a regular basis, and I really have no idea what she's getting at here.
Well, then what's the solution?
Zelensky's criticized for all kinds of things, but I'm not I'm not sure how, and maybe there's legitimate criticisms on some things. I don't necessarily agree with it, but it's at least a valid argument.
I'm
I
sure
don't
there is. He's an East European leader, and East European leaders have not fully escaped from the legacy of the Soviet Union across the
that, and
board.
he's had to thwart civil liberties, so that he could be criticized for.
Mhm.
Um, but and if you're gonna criticize him for those things, you have to at least put it in the context in which he's living, right? In Ukraine. But
Absolutely. I don't think he's done anything inappropriate since the war broke out. I really don't. Except he's made some remarks to Israel, which I found a little bit
oh
about.
yeah, when he compared the what's happening to Ukraine to the Holocaust, I thought was absolutely absurd.
Especially coming from a Jew, that's utterly nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, it was absolutely nuts. He was on kind of a world tour to try to get different governments who were in a position to help Ukraine to open their wallets and help out, and he tailored his argument to each country that he spoke to, and that's what he came up with when he talked to Israel. Like he compared their invasion by Russia to the Holocaust, and it's not a Holocaust. It's absurd.
No,
What he should have done, right? If he's going to tailor his argument to Israel, you compare it to the Yom Kippur War and how Nixon, helped by sending in the airlift, right? Like do something like that would have been an appropriate comparison. That would actually have been spot on,
right.
but not the Holocaust.
No, there's no relationship whatsoever. It's as dumb as Candace Owens' comment about Hitler and nationalism,
Mhm.
if not
And
worse.
also, I thought it was very uncouth and very unpolitical for him to come to speak to our U.S. Congress, asking for money in a T-shirt and cargo pants. I
Oh,
thought
come on. Who the hell cares about that?
he should have put a suit on.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I have not put on pants since the pandemic, and I'm very proud of that.
That's you. But if you're going to go to
And I
another,
am a respected
if
professor.
you're going to go to the world, to the most powerful country, the richest country in the world, and ask them for money, at least put on a pair of nice pants
He was
and
in military gear. He was making a point that his country's at war and he's in battle mode.
whatever.
It's
I
like
thought,
Mussolini and Franco walking around in military
honestly, I
uniform.
don't think it's worth denying his country money over, but I do think that it was inappropriate.
Well, you heard what happened when he spoke in Canada, of course, right?
No,
That
what
they,
happened?
they,
Who
you hear this?
cares? Canada.
Canadian Parliament, he came to speak, and
I
they
gotta dig.
honored him, and they called up to the stage to stand with him. I think he went on stage, but everyone gave this guy an ovation and all that, and clapped. Someone, a veteran from World War II, from Ukraine. Okay, they only found out, presumably, everyone assumed he was fighting for the Soviet army for liberation from Nazi Germany. Well, it turns out that he was actually
Oh, that, yeah, I remember that. That wasn't, yeah, that was a different guy. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, he was in the Luftwaffe,
He
SS
was
Ukraine.
actually a Nazi.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was an outright
They honored him,
Nazi.
right?
Yeah,
And
who should have never been let into Canada in the first place.
didn't the Speaker of the House of Commons have to resign after
Yes,
that?
yeah.
Yeah, that's.
But the Speaker in the House in the Canadian Parliament's very different than how it works in the United States. He's not an elected official. He's basically a schmigag nobody. So, but the point is that it occurred in conjunction
Trudeau would
with
have gotten into some trouble over
who
that.
did?
Trudeau should have.
Yeah, I agree with you. But but the point here, the wider point, without commenting on Canadian politics, is that the shadow of Ukrainian anti-Semitism is still cast over contemporary Ukraine, even though they have an elected president who is Jewish, right? I mean, there is just a long history of blood spilled of Jews by Ukrainians. Sometimes in the name of Ukraine, sometimes in the name of their Cossacks, whatever, going all the way back to Bogdan Khmelnytsky in the 1600s. And it's a problem. And again, obviously it's a problem. This is typical of collective memory everywhere. Bogdan Khmelnytsky, the Cossack who, quote, unified Ukraine with Russia, his understanding of unification was very different than what the Tsar had in mind. But in the process of that war in the 1640s into the 50s, somewhere between, they don't even know, 20 and 70,000 Jews were massacred. Okay, the pogroms of 1881, I think in total several hundred, maybe a couple of thousand Jews over the course of 2 years were killed. We're talking about a massacre of 70,000 Jews in a country that was still more or less living in the Middle Ages. Modernity had not really touched them yet. And he's their national hero, and his statue stands there, in Kiev, and it's one of the greatest monuments. There was controversy over erecting it in the late 1800s when they did, but it's there. It's there for everyone to see. What do you do about that? Why is he a great Ukrainian hero is interesting, because all he did was, trade the Polish overlords for the Russian overlords, which didn't work out for Ukrainians in the long run, but he is their national hero.
Who?
Bogdan Khmelnytsky.
So?
I'm suggesting that the incident at the Canadian Parliament reflects the fact that the anti-Semitism that is deeply ingrained in Ukrainian history still casts its shadow over Ukraine today, which is why a lot of Jews, I think 2022 changed a lot of things. But even before that, even in 2014, most Jews, except for the emigres who left Russia towards the end of the Soviet period, but the ones who left from our generation, 1880 to 1920, left the Russian Empire, they didn't have a high opinion of Ukrainians. And they're still skeptical today. Whenever they hear the phrase Ukrainian nationalism, it sends a shudder through them.
Yeah, well, they're like Kramer, they've got no respect for Ukraine.
They got no respect for Ukraine, and they carved it up. Yeah. If you buy my Seinfeld book, you'll hear there's an attempt by the rabbis to dismember Ukraine at one point in that particular Seinfeld episode. The Yom Tov the librarian informs him that the yeshiva of Pumbed Vita, Babylon, is not empowered to actually dismember a foreign country. So, yeah, but so that's another plea for everyone to buy my book and read it and enjoy it. So again, the Ukrainian-Jewish relations over time is fascinating. It's a really complicated topic, not as complicated as Polish-Jewish relations, because the Poles were not militant anti-Semites in the same way that the Ukrainians were for much of their history. It's much more complicated in Poland. But what do you do with that? You can't just throw it away. Just to give you an interesting story here, since we're talking about Ukraine, I had someone in an extended family I'm not related to by blood, and he was over for dinner at some relative's house. He escaped.
This person is Mahutin?
I guess he's technically a Mahutin, but it's pretty far away, because it's a cousin, a second cousin married to a second cousin's husband's father or uncle or something. I don't know. But I was studying Russian history at the time. I was in my MA program, and I was over at the house where he was at as a dinner guest. And he was someone, he might have still been a child at the time, or maybe he was a teenager or a young adult. But when the Ukraine or Poland was carved up by the Soviet Union and by Germany, he was able to flee. I don't know which side of the border he found himself on, but the doors were open and he was able to flee into Soviet territory. So he survived the Holocaust by making his way through the Soviet Union, and they were letting Jews in. They even helped some Jews to get in. So, he was, I was talking to him, and just out of the blue, he said, Stalin was really not that bad a guy. And I said, what? And he said, well, he saved my life. He opened the borders for Jews who were facing Nazi persecution in Poland, and he let us in. Okay, we could leave aside the fact that Stalin was not personally responsible for that, but I could sort of get with that picture how at the very least the Stalinist government saved him from genocide. But then he said, and secondly, anyone who would kill that many Ukrainians is not all that bad.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so he was there, grew up, or at least heard about the Ukrainian famine that took place. So that's his collective memory, and it really shows you for Jews. It really comes down to when you were born and what period you happen to have left that part of the world. Because the blood of Jews still runs through their veins in many respects.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we've exhausted the topic.
Of Candace Owens, that's it. We got a lot of mileage out of this one tweet, which I'm going to read again because everyone needs to realize that this is deeply anti-Semitic. President Zelensky sure is behaving like a Bolshevist. How many more Christians will he conscript to death? This is something that could be straight out of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, accusing Jews of all being communists who are oppressing Christians in a variety of ways. And it's no different from slurring somebody as a Zionist if you're Jewish, right? Calling them a Bolshevik.
Bible in there too.
What?
It's got kind of a blood libel inserted into that. The
How many
Christian.
more Christians will you conscript? Yeah, absolutely. But I remember I was teaching the first time I ever taught outside of Berkeley when I was still a graduate student. I was teaching at this digital arts college in Oakland. They all had to take a Western Civ class compressed into 5 weeks. The class were a combination of techie nerds and skateboarders. Sort of like the people in the Matrix. But when when fascism and communism came up, and they knew I was Jewish. One woman put up her hand and she said, "Are you a communist?" Totally out of the blue. Sure enough, when they had to give their oral presentations, she played guitar and wrote a love song to Mussolini. So I think that pretty much cemented the deal. And then later on, my first time I was teaching Zionism in Israel, there was a student there who was a radical Marxist. And he put up his hand and said, "Are you a Zionist?" And you know what? There's a relationship between both those charges. Right. And I was being outed as a Jew, in the first day of my Zionism in Israel class before it even really started. And I looked at him, I said, "You're not going to figure that out until week 7." And that's what makes me a good teacher. So,
All
yeah.
right.
So this is anti-Semitism, folks, and it's coming from the political right. There is anti-Semitism on the right,
There is, of course,
just
there
like
is.
the left. And it's from someone who unfortunately wields a lot of influence, and online influence today constitutes a form of power, which can't be ignored, right? She might not be in the government, but that's immaterial. She does affect the way people think about certain things.
Well, I just worry that because of her fan following that she has, she's going to convince people that aren't really thinking about this clearly.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, her fans have to be, clever enough to make the connection between Bolshevism and Jews, which, no offense to our young,
Not the only tweet, though. I mean, there's been several comments that are very obviously problematic.
right. Yeah.
And then she always says, "I'm just asking questions," right? She
Well,
says she asks a question that is in and of itself a statement that is deeply anti-Semitic, and then says, "I'm just asking a question."
yeah, well, that's not a
It's a
question. This
common
is
tactic that
yeah.
people use to get away
Well,
with saying.
as much as I hate Ben Shapiro, I think he
Why
really,
do you hate Ben Shapiro?
because I think everything he says sounds moronic. I've never heard him say anything that contained any insight whatsoever. And I obviously don't align with him politically, but I'm sure I could find people on the right who I find very intelligent and articulate.
Like Ben
But,
Shapiro, very intelligent and
oh, he's
articulate.
not. I don't think look, okay, I mean, people on the left, absolutely despise him. They also despise Barry Weiss, for instance, and I like Barry Weiss
I would not.
because
She's not on the right.
I
She's
know
a
that first of all, you should know this by now that people on the left don't only slam people on the right for being on the right. Okay, she's a fascist because she's a Zionist, end of story. But my
right.
point is that I align with her politically, so I do like her, right? I think we align almost perfectly politically, and certainly as far as Jewish matters go. But she's no deep thinker, right? I don't think she's really ever said anything. I mean, her speeches I find very empowering at times because she knows how to speak to an audience. But I read her book on anti-Semitism. There was really nothing sophisticated in it. And she does make a hell of a lot of major mistakes when it comes to Soviet Jewish history. At the same time, her interpretation of anti-Semitism today from its 3 different points of origin, the right, the left, and Islamic anti-Semitism, I thought was spot on. I like the way that she divided the 3.
Yeah.
I
All
think
right.
there's a
What do
lot
you
of
have to
merit.
do with Ben Shapiro?
My point is that I don't think she's necessarily that much cleverer than Ben Shapiro, and I would almost put them on the same plane as thinkers.
He's a lot more clever than she is. He knows his stuff.
He knows the lyrics to Wet Ass Pussy.
All right, whatever.
Yeah. Well, okay, maybe I'll give him more of a chance and I'll tune in a little bit. I mean, I do read the Daily Wire occasionally. It's not my favorite news outlet, but they occasionally have stories in there which I can't necessarily find anywhere else. And I know how to remove political bias from a story when I'm reading it. I do have a PhD, so I just don't particularly have a high opinion of him. And I would like to think that there are deeper thinkers who are Jewish on the right than he is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would not call him a thinker.
Well, precisely my point.
He's a polemicist. He's a very good one.
Okay,
I would call him a deep thinker.
well, Lenin was a polemicist, and he was
I
also
think
brilliant.
Dennis Prager is a lot deeper in his ability to think than Ben Shapiro.
Well, I think Dennis Prager is also an idiot, but that's just me.
He has a much, I think, a better, firmer grasp of content, of knowledge and facts.
I find his
Dennis,
interpretations very.
Dennis though, is a lot clearer of a thinker.
I find them very simplistic.
All right.
I don't disagree with everything that he says. I certainly don't. But I think much of what he says about the
He's a
left.
deep thinker, but he has to package it in a simple way for popular audience.
Well, look at Lenin. I mean, Lenin
Yes.
was absolutely brilliant, an amazing intellectual, and he was also a skilled polemicist. I mean, he had both, right? Whereas someone like Hitler, who was, a brilliant polemicist and charismatic, I mean, the guy was a rambling idiot. If you ever read anything that he wrote, he had no cognitive ability in any meaningful
I
sense.
need to compare him to anybody to Hitler. Like that's just
No, but I'm talking. Look, I mean, the guy was charismatic, and he managed to, win over the German population through his charisma. But if you, Mein Kampf is an utterly rambling text without any sort of grounding, whatsoever in any sort of theories, except his rather simplistic racial apocalyptic war one, which was taken from other people. I mean, it's not even his. But Lenin, on the other hand, you're not going to deny that Lenin was intelligent, as the Russians like to say. Trotsky, look at Trotsky. A Jew who was not only a brilliant thinker, which is stereotypically Jewish, but a very skilled military man. Important to have people like that in our history. And he might be useful for the book that you're writing.
Right.
Oh God, there's a lot of Bolsheviks who are useful for the book you're writing, but we could save the conversation for another time.
Talk about that later.
All right. Well, I thought this was an interesting episode. Adam has unfortunately lost one of his idols, Candace Owen. So
Paul said that she's an idol of mine. I thought that she was a respectable pundit on the political right,
do
and
you have a crush on her?
I thought her insights were needed during a lot of these riots that we saw a few years ago.
I'm not getting into a debate about BLM. That's the last thing I want to do right now. But yeah, I again, I didn't follow her at that time either. So I've never paid attention to her except when she makes the news for something controversial that she says. But now that she's an anti-Semite, I'm going to be paying more attention to her. All right, thank you.
Yeah, now you'll pay attention to her because of the anti-Semitism.
Absolutely, that's what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned about
Yeah.
Jews. Otherwise, I don't like getting sucked into the vortex of American politics. I might be a citizen now, but as a Canadian, I still despise and have a rather low opinion of much of what passes for politics in this country. I find it very stressful and annoying, but I'm also a Jew, and I'm concerned about our security here, whether it comes from the left or it comes from the right.
We should have had Moshe Bernstein back for this episode because he and I have had the same trajectory when it comes to Candace Owens.
Oh, really? Well, we could get Sasha to come on and talk about Candace Owens. I think he has a
We
little.
could. Sasha, if you're listening, you're invited.
Yeah, Sasha's listening.
Talk about any topic you want under the sun. Anything.
Well, yeah.
Anything?
He had an interesting tweet the other day about bathrooms at the Colorado airport. Someone went off on a rant. It was funny. Someone went off on a rant on Twitter about how all the bathrooms are gender neutral.
Oh, I'm right. Yeah, you showed.
Yeah. And then he went off on this rant. I was just at the Colorado airport, and there was a men's room, and it had doors going from the ceiling to the floor. It was one of the loveliest, most comfortable bathrooms that I've ever, been in. And well, I wonder what Sasha was doing in there for an hour between his flights, but that's really none of my business.
I don't.
And it's really people on Twitter is not their business either. Yet he felt the compunction.
I don't follow Sasha, and you know why I don't follow Sasha?
He blocked you.
Well, actually, there's a couple of reasons I don't follow him. Number one, he blocked me. Why did he block me? Because I'm associated with you. That's why he blocked me.
Yeah, you implicated yourself.
I implicated myself. The second reason that I don't follow Sasha is because I really couldn't care less what he says. Like why do you even bother? Why do you care?
Because he's entertaining as fuck. I really get amusement out of reading his tweets.
By you being entertained by him.
Okay, whatever works for you, but I find his tweets very entertaining.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's almost a parody, except he's so not funny when he's trying to be funny. God, he made some joke about something last week that was, oh yeah, his April Fool's joke was insulting me. He made an April Fool's post. And he said that two of the people who've been assholes to me in Jewish studies, called me up and apologized, and they did so because my most dedicated troll told them to. I'm the most dedicated troll in there. I could guess who the other two people are, but I'm not going to name them. Or at least one of them I could guess. No, I could guess who both of them are. But that was his big April Fool's prank for the Twitterverse.
And all I did was invite him onto our podcast.
I don't see how I can be a troll if I'm not actually responding to him directly. How does that make me a troll? I'm not engaging with him.
I don't know.
I mean, that's not doesn't the troll actually, have to goad somebody on?
I think so. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't interacted with him since 2000. What?
You goad him sometimes.
Well, that requires someone reporting to him on Twitter what I posted on Facebook.
But look, I think he starts it with you too, though. So I don't think either of you are entirely to blame for your.
Started with me in 2006. He threatened to go to war with Tablet because they published me. He was going to take his boycott of Tablet up to another level because of it. So
you and him are like Jerry and Newman. He's Newman, you're Jerry.
Well, as long as I'm not Newman, that's the important thing.
He pops up now and then, and you whisper Newman, Sasha.
Yeah. All right. Well, now that we've settled who's who on Seinfeld in our real Jewish lives here, we're going to sign off. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We hope you found this episode, if not enlightening, then at the very least entertaining.
Yeah. Okay. Goodbye.
Jared and Adam saying good night.